How many of these webinars do you guys do, Ben?
We do a good number of them. We found that like just trying to get folks, in on a webinar in the middle of the day is always a good bet. Probably like two or three a month, I would say. I do a couple of
Hmm.
podcasts mixed in. How about you? How many webinars are you doing? What would you say?
Yeah, 2 or 3 a week. Like I'm pretty much doing them regularly. I'm trying to encourage people to do it. I
Yeah.
can see people sort of dropping into the chat right here. So, folks, I guess sound checks first. Can everyone hear us? Okay, it should be me and Ben in small screen at the bottom of the screen. There should be like a holding page for us. Thank you,
Hello.
guys. Thanks, Catherine. Nicole, you're tuning in. I hope you're feeling better. Tough when people are not feeling 100%.
Yeah, sorry, Nicole, that you're missing it, but we're gonna carry on in your honor. We heard you were sick, so we're gonna make it happen for you. So Hung, let me ask you a question. You're traveling right now. Do you bring your camera setup with you then? Like, what's your like go bag so you can do a webinar wherever, or are you just on your normal laptop, no microphone, running straight
Okay, the reality is, Ben, I'm actually using my friend's laptop, and it's balanced on 3 pint glasses right now,
Nice.
in an attempt to elevate it. And I've robbed an interview room from this huge conference, so I've called in a few
Nice.
favors, and I'm using sort of the production, the AV production, mega bandwidth Wi-Fi here. So secret
There you
password,
go.
pulling all the stops to make sure we have a smooth conversation here.
There you go. I imagine you had some like Batman style like belt with all your webinar stuff on it that you can just like shoot out a grappling hook and like pull a microphone really close to you or something like that.
I
That's
do,
how you
but
were rolling.
I've just found out the mic didn't work, so this is why you couldn't hear me sort of early part of this. So I had to just throw that away. So yeah, it's not always a good thing to have a lot of kit, to be honest with you. It's like go with the basics.
For sure, for sure. Well, we can get started whenever y'all think we're ready to get rolling here.
Yeah, I think we should roll, man.
Let's do it. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Fama Recruiting Brain Food, excuse me. Myself, Ben Mones, along with Hung Lee. Show you a quick slide that has our pictures on it, even though you can already see us. We can do a quick round of intros here. So, Hung, for those that don't know who you are, what you do, you want to lead us off with a quick intro, and then we'll jump into the topic and agenda for today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I still self-identify as a recruiter. Even though I haven't sent a resume or a CV in anger for about 10 years or so, but I have a long career working in recruitment as an agent and then as an in-house guy. I launched a few tech products also, and I now kind of write newsletters, do podcasts, go to events. So I see myself now as pretty much like a community support type figure in the industry. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And for those of you I don't know, I'm Ben Mones. I'm the CEO and founder at Fama. We're a online screening company. High level, you work with us if you want to help go from shortlist to finalist. We think online identity, who we are in text, image, and video, is a increasingly important source when it comes to determining quality of hire, whether it's evaluating risk or looking at traits and competencies, that we'll talk about a little bit later today. And yeah, I'm out of LA. I got two twin boys, 2.5 years old, big into cooking. And what you might not know about me is my dad won the 1977 North Carolina pork cooking champion, and my first business was a whole hog barbecue business. So that was my first biz, cooking pigs. That's what, and not too many Jews, by the way, are cooking pigs. So that's a different story.
That I didn't know. So you're a mean barbecue event. So next time I'm ever in your neck of the woods, we're gonna do a cookout or something.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, looking forward to it. So, should we hop into the topic for today? And we're going to start, of course, talking about AI. It's July 2024. How could we not put the word AI, automation, priority, HR executives? We have all the keywords here, but this presentation today really not just focused on artificial intelligence, its use in the world of talent acquisition, candidate screening, but really what Hung and I are here to talk about today is how companies are thinking about quality of hire, right? We know that quality of hire from LinkedIn research, wide array of different analyst groups, third parties, Mercer included, are talking about how quality of hire is an increasingly important priority for a wide array of talent acquisition professionals, recruiters more generally, and folks generally involved with how do I bring the best people into my organization, right? So really, we'll talk a little bit about the world of quality of hire, new tools that we're using. We'll focus, of course, on the world of artificial intelligence and technology. But Hung, you're heavy in the game, as you say. You're a regular contributor to the conversation, the narrative around how technology is deployed. You mentioned you're at a conference right now in Berlin, talking with developers about the role of recruiting in their lives, et cetera. How are you seeing AI and automation? Is it just a buzzword? Is this just like what people want to talk about to increase their stock price and market cap? Or is this actually happening in HR, the world of HR and TA?
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, as an ex-tech vendor myself, I can say that obviously exaggeration from founders is a normal thing. However, I don't think that AI is the hype. Where we're at in terms of where recruiters think about automation and technology is that they want to do it, they just don't know how, or they're not quite sort of able to make a switch between an older way of working. So they've got an established process, and we're struggling to find the bandwidth to make the switch. So the switching costs currently are too high. And I do believe we're waiting for easier to use software that's going to provide more obvious and immediate ROI. And maybe we need some kind of white glove support. We might need sort of a consultant community to emerge to help us get to rewire some of this stuff. So I think the argument has been won in the sense that clearly there are productivity gains to be gained from artificial intelligence within recruitment. We just had a period of time where we're struggling to systematize it, operationalize it, but I believe that's going to happen. We know what's at stake, so yeah, this is an inevitable part of the journey we're on, and we're going to go at different speeds to it, but we're getting there.
So it's not just talk. That's good to hear from your perspective. Then that's comforting, I would say, and that's an interesting point you make. So the realm of which consultants and supporting the effective deployment of technology like this. Before we get into, I think it's a really interesting notion that tech in itself, technology in a vacuum, is less valuable in terms of how it's actually deployed, the impact it has. Does it move the needle, so to speak, on hiring? So can you talk a little bit more about that evolution before we jump into the content today, sort of the consultant white glove support? What exactly do you mean by that, if maybe someone's hearing that for the first time?
Yeah, so I mean, I think basically we've all had a play with ChatGPT. Basically, we've all been amazed by this. We've all seen just a plethora of technologies come out to do seemingly amazing things. But I think the general experience we've had is that we've played with it, we've seen it, and then we just go back to business as usual the next day, because we've already got these existing systems that are on the go. Big part of the problem is that talent acquisition in 2024 is under-resourced and overstretched. So we've obviously lost a lot of people in our industry. TA teams have crunched down. The demands have increased in the sense, not necessarily of more vacancies, but certainly of more candidates per vacancy. It's really stretching the work that recruiters do. I don't think anybody who's currently in work right now is going to say they've had an easy sort of 2024. We've worked really hard. Right. And when you've got max capacity at 100%, let's say, you don't have the bandwidth to make any switches on current process. Sure. It's like driving a car down the highway. You got to have a pit stop to change the wheel. And you've got to basically have some confidence that pit stop is not going to render the car inoperable, that you're going to be able to do a swap in, swap out at a very controlled pace, and you're then going to go forward with, plus performance. We haven't got to that level of confidence yet, and we haven't been able to create the bandwidth in order to even stop the car. So I think that's basically where we're at right now with AI and TA.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I think, part of what we're seeing on our side, working, similarly with many clients that are either for the first time deploying, an AI-based system as part of their day-to-day, or two, have used the technology before, but maybe not in the context of informing a hiring decision when we go from that kind of shortlist to finalist process, as I mentioned. But part of the reason that we're seeing change, and this kind of gets to our next slide here in this stat that we're about to put up on the screen. But employers, I think, are beginning to reconcile and understand that changes to their workforce are driving changes to their toolkit. In other words, deploying the same sorts of technology and tools, not simply because they're out of vogue or because they don't have the term AI in them, but we're seeing more and more companies that are beginning to reconcile, understand exactly what their workforce looks like, right? And is the toolkit, the set of technologies, the processes that we have in place reflecting the workforce of today? So this is a stat that, really jumped out at me. It came from SHRM from earlier this year. We won't even get into the SHRM controversy today. That's not what this webinar is about. But, this stat came out earlier in the year from SHRM. And something makes sense to me, right? This is about millennials and Gen Z. So 50% of the workforce today are either millennial or Gen Z, and that number is set to rise to 75% by 2030. And these are all people, similar to myself. I remember like a decade ago, I was explaining to customers and partners of ours that, I'm a millennial, you can work with me, trust me. But now we've got, we're the old dogs in the industry. Now we got Gen Z, we got Gen Alpha that's just coming into the workforce too. So, when you saw this stat, I know we talked about this before we kicked off today, but what were your initial reactions? Like, what was your kind of guttural initial, right in your neural cortex? What was that first reaction you just had when you saw, this stat? Did you know this? You're like, yeah, no, duh, of course. That's exactly how the workforce is set up. But yeah, what did you think when you saw this number?
Yeah, I mean, it does change. I'm a big believer that the sort of technology that you first encounter has a really fundamental impact in terms of how you operate as a worker. I recall back in the day, so I kind of straddle sort of the internet pre and post. So I'm definitely older than I look, in the sense that, I walked into the world of recruiting, and it was the internet was just becoming a thing. There was actually a specialist division that was dealing with the internet as a recruitment sort of group. And there's a bunch of people there that really didn't make the transition into that world. They had really good skills that were suitable for the pre-internet world, great telephone sales people, basically. But they weren't able to become great searchers of the internet. They weren't able to become great emailers. They weren't able to write a good email. And I realized maybe a year or so working in there that, some of these great guys are not going to make it into the next phase. And my concern is that we're in a very similar moment now with AI, where we've got to get to grips with it. We can't just rely on the business as usual. We do have to take a pit stop, even if it's a very painful one. And we do need to change that wheel, because we don't want to be that person that doesn't go with this change. It's not just a trend; it's a transformatory wave, and we've got to be transforming with it. So that's I feel a sense of urgency on that, and I've got to be honest, a little bit a sense of responsibility also, because obviously I talk to a reasonable size audience. So I'm generally one of those people that are banging on as hard as I can to say, look, we've got to get on this bandwagon. Don't feel like you can avoid this.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, at Fama, when we deal really explicitly, and we'll talk more in today's, conversation about more of the behind the scenes, what it is and what it isn't when it comes to the world of online screening. But, it was a bit of a wake up call for us that, we knew that Gen Z was emerging, right? We knew that millennials were continuing to find their ways into management positions in a wide range of organizations. But seeing that 50%, 75% number, things began clicking on our side, where we started saying, all right, well, now employers are essentially tuning how they think about candidate screening, the tools, technology, in their toolkit, so to speak, which I think, we speak to here in a single image. We like presentations, by the way, that are not very heavy on text, but largely image driven. So, me and Hung can pontificate on the images rather than just reading you text off a screen. So in any event, we're starting to see companies who, instead of fighting the current, doing things the old way, for example, are starting to adopt technology, tools, processes that reflect the nature of the workforce today, right? And I think that's part of the kind of leap we're undergoing right now, which is this kind of typewriter to MacBook moment, the ability to create a certain number of words per minute to now suddenly having the entire universe essentially at your fingertips, right? And so I think this is the moment that we're beginning to start to see companies are saying, all right, well, it's not just technology that is available, but the nature of my workforce, where the insights lie, where the not where the secrets are, so to speak, but this essential foundation of information, detail, who we are is changing with the nature of the workforce itself, and it's an evolution that's happening right now that I think, to your point, folks are starting to pick up on.
Well, when you think about it, it's the CV or the resume is a pre-internet sort of artifact. It's even a pre-digital artifact when you think about it. It's written on a piece of paper and it was like handed over, and all of the information we had in the candidate was locked in that document, and you couldn't distribute it, you couldn't change, you couldn't do anything with it. You just had to consume it there and then.
Right.
And of course, the shift online completely changed it in terms of its distribution. It could scale out, it could send it to many more people. But of course, on the topic of the conversation we're having today, there's actually lots more information about a person that's also being distributed and also being scaled out that isn't locked into the CV.
Sure.
And as you say, can we derive insight from those types of behaviors that are important for recruiting? And I think there's nobody out there who's listening to this webinar or watching this webinar, listening to this on this podcast, would pretend that the CV or resume is the ultimate way to get insight on somebody. We know it's a weak document. So we are actively looking for alternatives or supplementary ways to find insight. And yeah, I think the stuff we're about to talk in now is going to be very interesting to explore. Can we find that from how these people do communicate? I say these people, but it includes definitely me and you. How do we communicate online? And can we get any insight from what we think, what our values are, what our behaviors are from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And took a look at our poll, by the way. So thanks to those of you that filled it out. It does look like we got a nice mix of those that are and aren't digital natives, right? And I think the big question that's in front of us is, look, we're not trying to make this more complex than it is. We know that a big piece of talent acquisition, a big goal for hiring managers to just simplify it down to its base components, is asking ourselves this question: how is somebody going to act when they join my company? How are they going to act around fellow employees? How are they going to act around customers? Are they going to champion the values we have in our culture? Are they going to detract from that, right? I know there's the qualification, the skill set, et cetera, but once we get over whether or not somebody is qualified, right? Do they have the requisite baseline experience? Can they, if you're hiring someone to do trigonometry, can they do trigonometry, right? That's the basic question. But that, is the real difference we've seen between qualified hires and quality hires, right? The sort of quality of hire question of, is this person going to advance the initiatives that we have laid out, that we know at a higher level within our organization are tied to the goals we have? And that's all stakeholders, right? That's not just our shareholders, but what our employees want, what's right for our company, what's right for our customers. So, I think in a lot of ways, looking at the online, sort of existence, if you will, of a person, again, who they are in text, image, and video, while certainly there's a ton of pictures of, cute dogs and funny memes and crazy tweets about politics, no matter where you live in the world. There's a lot of noise out there, but there's also signal, which is what we're going to talk, a little bit about today. So why don't we take a look, and I'd love to talk to you, Hung, a little bit about the poll you put up on LinkedIn here, maybe in a second, but I did want to point out one sort of new angle that's really emerged in the past, really couple of years in the world of talent acquisition, where in the same way that we've begun to see ChatGPT with its uncanny ability or any of these other Gen AI consumer facing tools, their ability to magically rework text, to answer questions that are in many cases, complex, answered simply, nuanced, answered clearly, right? The ability to construct, demystify, and reconstruct text and organize it in a way that makes it seem like a human is talking to you is really the result of a machine being able to discern patterns in text, to look at everything from sentiment analysis to conjugation to punctuation to a wide array of how language is organized and what we like to call kind of a closed system. We're now starting to see how that same sort of technology is now being blended with psychology. So that's what we'll be talking a little bit, more about later on as we get deeper into some of these conversations about how online identity is used to evaluate candidate quality. Hung, you've been kind enough to be willing to share your Fama Instant Fit report, which we'll talk about in a bit. But what we've seen now is the ability that employers can actually leverage some of the latest advances when it comes to Gen AI and text deconstruction, reconstruction, rewriting, recreating, to begin positioning that in the world of psychology. In the same way that if you've ever taken an assessment and provided a writing sample, maybe you've answered a series of questions on a self-assessment, for example, that grounded towards the professional traits you have or the learned competencies you've developed. We know people use assessments. 50% roughly of employers in the United States deploy assessment at some point in their workflow. What we've discovered recently, and it's a new innovation called Fama Instant Fit, is that we can actually take the language that people are creating online in the same way that you might take a language from a writing sample that you send to a candidate and be able to distill down the traits and competencies using models like the Big Five, Hexaco framework, for example, well-validated, historically well-understood models, where suddenly we're able to take the power of this AI technology that we've been developed, merge it with this old world Big Five, psychology traits, competencies that have been around for decades, and begin to generate an output where suddenly this digital native, what I'll just call revolution, if you will, in the workforce is suddenly presenting something very interesting. Where I think, in so many words, man, like we're living through history right now. Like we are living through a period of such rapid change when it comes to what technology will be able to do in the world of talent acquisition that I think a lot of folks feel like they're like just trying to keep their head above water and understanding what's latest, right? I mean, I know you saw your Instant Fit report, and I don't think you believed it at first until we showed it to you, right?
No, I mean, I think it's a really interesting document to share. The reality is, I mean, when you frame it like this, it's like how much digital information have all of us put out there? Just in terms of word count, for instance, I looked at my Twitter the other day, and I actually sent something like 70,000 tweets. I mean, obviously, I'm an idiot by spending so much time on Twitter. The 70,000 tweets probably is a better. You could probably find out more about me in terms of that amount of information I've shared compared to a 2-page resume that I might rustle up, because that's me sort of commenting online on what topics am I commenting on, how am I doing so, has it changed over time, what language am I using, all of that stuff is all going on without me ever thinking about creating an image per se. So yeah, I mean, you take any social network, or then you combine the social networks, then you can understand actually there's a lot of information out there that could be very interesting to use and highly relevant in many cases. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting kind of unmined asset to try and to discover, even though I think it's unusual for a lot of recruiters to think about. It's fairly unusual, maybe discomforting a sense, which I talked about it, I think, in a poll yesterday or the day before, and it was very interesting to read the commentary. I don't know how many people piled in, 150, 200 people were commenting.
Hundreds of comments,
Yeah, nearly 1,000 people voted on the poll I put in.
Yeah.
And it was really a mix between, my read of it was that most people intuitively felt that it wasn't a good thing to look at a social media footprint or digital footprint in order to assess a candidate. It was very interesting, and we could break down the reasons why. Number one, there was a sort of concern on privacy. So, are we digging in to stuff that isn't that we shouldn't for a privacy perspective? Number two, there were also people that there was the sense that it might increase bias. So, for instance, am I going to look through on someone's Instagram and then confirm my previously biased opinions on, I don't know, Chinese people or something? Third thing was like, what's the relevancy?
Right.
And the disconnect. There was a sense of how can someone's online behavior possibly impact their behavior in work. I think that's under-examined, but I understand the instinct. And those were the main criticisms. I do encourage people to read through the thread. I thought it was very interesting, particularly some of the rebuttals that came through. So I was very interested to hear some of it was a rarer number of people that were kind of pro doing this. And one of them, some of them are quite funny. The first one was saying, "Look, we're going to do it anyway. Don't lie to yourself." I like that. I like that approach, because when you think about it, we do that. We qualify everybody with a social search. If a vendor comes in, we are gonna Google them, aren't we?
Right.
You're on a date with somebody. Are you not gonna do a quick check on Instagram? Of course you are. So
Right.
we do this as part of just human curiosity. So
Right.
it seems weird to me that we would seek to abandon this, even though we do it in our own personal lives in any case.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think part of it. Sorry to interrupt you. Part of it is like this question I think that a lot of folks have around the very fuzzy nature of what online screening can be. Right. I by the way completely agree with, if you're a recruiter and you're digging into the social media of a candidate, an applicant, however you want to think about it, yourself, and you're doing the work, and suddenly you see political affiliation. Suddenly you see someone who might be talking about their pregnancy. Maybe they're talking about a disability online, right? These are things that like have no bearing whatsoever on a person's success in a role, right? And I think that extends even into concepts that range from, their political persuasion that might ignite an unknown bias that you might have as a recruiter when you're doing your own work, when you're doing your own vetting. And I think it's the employers who sort of wrote back in that thread that had said, hey, look, like, we're not looking at whether or not Jane likes, blueberry donuts or chocolate donuts, right? We want to know if she's acted hateful, violent, or threatening towards other people, because that could directly impact our culture and brand in a negative way. And that's one of the things that, we understand, right? I mean, as a company who's been in the space for a while, we've seen so many, individual people that were affected by things like Cambridge Analytica, with the massive data theft that's been out there, the way that social media data has been used for all the wrong reasons, from everything from, increasing, unfortunately, teen suicide, to stolen elections, to anything that you can imagine, outside influence to change the nature or outcome of a political election. Social media has been used, and that personal data has been used for all the wrong reasons. But I think what we're seeing now is that as employers are asking themselves this question of, how do I ensure I'm hiring somebody that hasn't, acted intolerant towards other people based on what they look like or where they're from, or, posted, a ton about illegal drug use online, when we know, that's something that you can pretty easily beat today, through a range of alternatives, as they say. It's that difference between saying there are certain things that we care about from the work that we're actually going to do, but the real unlock, I think, that we've seen are companies that are now saying, okay, well, if we can actually use the language that people are posting online, and we know that language is essentially able to tell us about something about someone in the same way that a self-assessment might, and is mathematically sound, that's where everything is suddenly beginning to change. Because I think this slide asked that right question, which is like, what is happening today, right? We talk about, the stale resume, if you will, the pre-hire assessments, interviews, a whole range of pre-screening that's out there. The folks that did respond, yeah, we're doing it, are clearly saying, hey, look, there's more to the story. The toolkit I have right now is not enough to get me to where I need to be. So, it's one of these pieces, I think, where you're seeing more and more companies who, we agree, doing it yourself. You see a lot of stuff you shouldn't see. You can't unring the bell, as they say in the States. But, more generally, it's, I think, a function of folks saying, hey, look, if I'm ensuring quality of hire, I need to go beyond the existing and legacy toolkit that I have.
Yeah, no doubt. Amanda, thank you so much for the question, by the way. Folks, if you do have any questions, do use the question function at the bottom of the screen. We're going to get to each of those. I think you're absolutely right. That there's a few things that sort of, the reason why I thought that conversation online was, again, very interesting, was because it was actually very educational to me. Particularly as some of the people that were supportive of the idea that we should be using all of the information that's available. The first point was on a compliance issue. There's a couple of people that mentioned they were recruiting for, let's say, a public school or something like this. And there's obvious sort of reasons why you want to do this. So it's not like just a blanket slate to say you can or cannot. Or you should not, ipso facto, use online presence as part of your decision-making process. There's a compliance issue. Certain institutions are going to require it. Maybe certain legislations, countries might require it, in which case you're going to roll forward. The second thing was related again to specific types of job that had that need, particularly if you're working with children, for instance, and stuff like that. You would expect a search of that type to be carried out. As soon as some of those use cases were volunteered, my sort of initial skepticism kind of slid away a little bit, because I thought, yeah, of course. It became from almost a soft no type of position to more of a harder yes, because it was like there's enough of course situations for the idea to completely shift.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think part of it again is sort of understanding the reasons why and the nuance behind the approach and how other folks have done it. I think if you're trying to look at a person's web presence, to determine if they're gonna be a hard worker, right? And you're doing the work yourself and trying to look at what time they're posting, et cetera. Sure, there might be something there, but what we really see are the folks that use this sort of technology today. When it comes to managing risk, certainly it's on the bright red line stuff, that if somebody said something racist in a job interview, you wouldn't hire them anyway, right? If they said something anti-Semitic, for example. But most people don't do that in a job interview, right? And that, I think, is why, based on the toolkit, we know a lot of these folks, from what we've heard, of the quality of hire isn't always impacted through some of the tools that we're talking about, right? So you talk to me about a scenario. You use all these tools, you have all these technologies, you got 6 different vendors that are helping you with everything from verifications to resume analysis, et cetera, skills-based hiring. Why don't they all work as expected? You've been in the field forever. What's your take on why some of these tools and technologies just might not get you to, that QOH, that quality of hire question?
I think firstly, we were confused about what quality of hire is. It's firstly, we don't agree on what that is. And it may well be one of those where it's a case by case for every organization. So you have to come up with the meaning yourself. And that's a process a lot of companies haven't gone through. Secondly, there's so many things that impact a person's performance. We're not atomic individuals that can operate outside of context, with the level of that robotic consistency. That's not the case. We're human beings, we're social beings, and a lot of the work that we get, a lot of the recruitment we do are in jobs that have a strong, high collaboration intensity. And so your ability to work with others and the ability of those others to work with you is oftentimes not determined in a standard assessment process. If I'm going to functionally test someone, let's say, on their ability to do, I don't know, a marketing document. I'm hiring for a marketing person. I want them to come with a marketing strategy. Brilliant. I'm sure they could all do that. But are they going to be the best person for the team setup that I have? Are they going to be the best setup for the sort of company we are? Those things are not sort of going to be determined by that functional test. There's other things that we're trying to cover with that, which is why the interview, for instance, remains very key component of the interviewing process. And probably the answer to your question is that any assessment tool alone is unlikely to give you enough information to determine quality of hire. They have to be used in conjunction with other sort of techniques of assessment.
Brings up an interesting question then. So, what I like about that, the first part of your sort of response there is this idea that there's disagreement on what quality of hire really is, right? That there isn't a set framework or understanding or shared understanding internally. So one solution, is just throwing technology and money at the problem, which doesn't always work, but we've seen that deployed a number of times in a wide range of companies. But how do you see businesses sort of arranging and agreeing on what quality of hire is? Like, what are the important components that, for any listeners on the call, they might be paying attention to, they could bring back to their day-to-day, to their team, and say, hey, when we're thinking about quality of hire, what are the factors that are important to us? When you sort of advise companies on that sort of stuff, like, how are you guiding them towards generating what I'll just call like a shared, frame of reference, if you will, on what quality of hire is at a company?
Yeah, I think there's a number of tools that you can kind of pull together from other businesses. You can learn from what other companies have done, but I do think it's very important that it's an emergent metric from within your own company culture. What is a good performer? What are they doing in terms of their output? What are they doing in terms of their behavior and their activity? Because sometimes the output cannot be controlled. Recruiters actually would know this very well. If you're on a recruitment team, and you could have a very strong recruiter working extremely difficult roles, and their output may be actually a low number of hires. Compared to a mediocre recruiter hiring for easier to fill roles, then numbers are going to go through the roof. I mean, the output difference is going to be very stark. But that doesn't tell you quality of hire alone. I want to be seeing behaviors in there. What are they actually doing? How are they trying to solve these problems?
Right.
So it's really a mix of those things, qualitative and quantitative sort of methods of assessment. Not easy to do. You've got to get a lot of stakeholders involved. By the way, a part of the reason why quality of hire is a number we're a little bit scared of is because it does require a lot of work to even get to first base. It's not just a number that immediately emerges. You've got to really go through the work to produce the measuring system that makes sense for you. But from a recruiting point of view, you've obviously got to map it to performance, people that do perform. So you need to have individuals that historically have done well. What are they doing behavior-wise that makes sense? How do you take those behaviors and then how do you measure those? Are we mapping those behaviors to how we assess for individuals? Right. And then deploying it sort of in that assessment funnel so that you're changing the way in which you're recruiting based on the good performers that you're getting through the door. It's a big project of work. It's not something that you can immediately go from we don't have a quality of hire measure to yes, we have a quality of hire measure. You'll get there, but you've got to put some sweat in there to make it happen.
And what I think is interesting too, which you bring up like very succinctly, better than I would even say it, but you have hiring managers who come to recruiters and essentially are looking for outcomes in many ways, right? They're looking for, we need someone to help, get us from A to B. And when we get to B, that's how we're going to know we had the right person. But too often recruiters are kind of caught in between what is essentially requirements gathering for behaviors and desired sort of, call it inputs to generate that outcome, and are simply presented with the outcome, which to a recruiter, sure, if you're embedded in a business unit and you are at a large organization where you're only recruiting for one type of hire, maybe it's like, iPhone engineer at Amazon who works on a delivery product, sure, that might be you know exactly what the behaviors are that lead up to it. But what we've often seen is that there's a disconnection between what the person is going to do in the job, the behaviors, as you said, the activities that that person is going to do, and how those behaviors and activities actually lead to the outcomes for the organization. So too often, I think recruiters are tasked with doing the in-between, where there isn't that conversation of, okay, well, quality of hire for us doesn't necessarily mean generate X outcome. Quality of hire means, this person has these behaviors, these activities that we know they can do, these skills we know that they have. And then it's on the hiring manager and the management team more generally to kind of guide that person to the outcome. But I think quality of hire is often lost in the definition of the outcome, right? And the behavior that leads to that outcome.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the reasons why quality of hire isn't the ubiquitous measure, because recruiters might rightly fear it to a large degree because they're not really responsible for the outcomes, as you say.
Right.
You could never recruiter. This would resonate to you guys. I mean, let me know if this does resonate to you. You might have done a brilliant job of hiring an absolutely amazing candidate, but they go into an environment where they cannot succeed. There's a management problem there, or the task that team's been set has been misspec'd, and there's no way anybody can deliver against it. You can't say that's a bad quality of hire. The quality of the person is very high. They're just in a context where they can't succeed. We've all been there. So yeah, it has to be combined with the management of the employee, and this is one of the biggest conundrums of recruitment is what is the relationship? Where is the recruitment and HR relationship mesh? And we've always had that problem as to who handles a candidate once they become an employee, and it's the quality of hire is one of those measures that cuts right across those two domains.
Right. No, it's such a good point, man. We could talk for ages about that conundrum, but I want to make sure the audience can kind of see your instant fit report, which comes up here in the next section, because I think it's really interesting. But this question on using online identity to evaluate candidate quality, we've talked a little bit about the results of your poll, and some folks have conceptions like, well, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole if I'm going to see a person's political affiliation, disabilities, et cetera, aspects of their personal life. But, when we've thought historically, I think we got another poll coming too, so we'll get that rolling here in a sec. But when we think about using online identity to evaluate candidate quality, one thing that we're looking at, of course, what I think has, started off as this idea of a social media background check per se, of asking, and to your point about some of the compliance pieces, in the UK, right, we know there are, FCA requirements on social media screening now for new hires. We know in the state of California, I saw, in the questions group here, there are some police officers and law enforcement officers to even get a concealed carry, which is big here, as hung in the States. You have to get a social media check to get a permit to even become a police officer to protect the public. So we are seeing more and more organizations that have said, hey, look, before bringing somebody into your organization, we want to run that check, make sure that person hasn't acted intolerant, threatening, harassing towards others. And sort of the beauty of going with a third party is that you don't see all the stuff you shouldn't see. You don't see, for example, the photos of someone and their dog, their kid at the baseball game, right? The selfie at them at the delivery room when they're about to deliver their first kid, right? Or them checking into a PT appointment, right, for a back thing that they had messed up. Those are the sorts of reasons that people want to stay, rightly so. In the same way you don't ask somebody in a job interview, hey, have you ever injured yourself? We know you're joining this construction company, right? Those are things that people don't tend to ask for good reason, because it's invasive and relies on things that aren't related to the job. But what companies
hang on, Ben. That's actually a really interesting bit of insight. Again, that's something I didn't quite grok, so to say. And actually, Catherine in the chat mentioned something very pertinent, where she said, just to read this out, folks, in case you haven't read it. It looks like Catherine had a team member that was a recruiter, but like misidentified an individual on a social media check. It was about to reject that individual based on that misidentification. Obviously, very bad. But what you're saying is we don't want recruiters to do this. We actually have a third-party tool. Obviously, this is your tool, Ben, but the reason why a third-party tool is useful is so that you don't expose the recruitment team to these mistakes, these types of behaviors. It is the tool that's going to do the crawling, so to say, and it's going to essentially insulate a lot of the non-relevant information that the recruiter has no reason to particularly care about. And it's only almost like a red flag check, whereby you'll do a search and just pull out a few red flags if they do emerge. Like, for instance, I don't know, we talk about politics, and we definitely don't want to be in a position where we're vetoing candidates based on your own political preferences. But with the caveat, there's probably certain political positions that are, beyond the pale. Or if you're a business owner, or you're an employer with a sort of a public responsibility, or you've got a stated commitment to certain values, I think it's legitimate for you to say, actually, we want people that adhere to those values. We use this as part of our hiring process. I think that would make sense. So yeah, using third party maybe is one of the ways in which we kind of remove the bias, because we're not actually suggesting human recruiters look through someone's Instagram and make those calls.
Yeah, absolutely. And, probably a better opportunity. We'll jump into the sort of, instant fit piece here in a second. But, I think part of it, Hung, is sort of what you just said, which is like, we're not, again, trying to make this more complicated than it is. We know that the challenge for the recruiter is, how's this person going to behave? How are they going to act, right, around the fellow employees, around customers? And the online source of information, it's not going to tell you everything about that person, but it is going to help you identify a couple of bright red lines. Because to your point, like 95% of people, maybe 90% of people in certain industries are going to come back with a clear. In other words, they're not going to have any hits on their digital background that's going to confirm in so many ways what you already know, what you already believe. Because keep in mind, this is typically done towards the tail end of the evaluation process, when you either have a finalist or a couple of people for a role, in the same way you might think about other types of background checks today. Now, this is the screening for risk, screening for misconduct. And to your point, there are a couple of key pieces here that, we like to talk about. We'll just do a quick implementation rundown. But first is, screening earlier in your process, right? Of putting yourself in a position where you've got 3 people per role, maybe a finalist, so that you learn this information before it's too late. 2 is transparency, right? We talk a lot about, the being candid with your candidates about what's happening, obtaining consent, right? If you're doing this for pre-employment, no matter where you are in the world, with very few exceptions, letting a candidate know that this is happening, giving them an opportunity to come back and contest the results. If there is something that comes back that makes you want to move forward with a no hire decision, and creating a conversation with the candidate, right? Making sure this doesn't happen behind closed doors. 2 is what you just mentioned, the focus on job relevant behaviors, right? Doing this yourself, you see stuff that you shouldn't see, you find yourself going down a path, where you're looking at things that are not part of whether or not someone's going to be a good fit. With a third-party tool, and look, you can use Fama, you can use different solutions out there. There's a bunch of different vendors. We believe, we're the best, but that's a conversation for another time. But the ability to only focus on job relevant behaviors, in other words, to say, I just want to know in the last 2 years if someone acted hateful towards other people. We've got a healthcare professional. We want to make sure that they're not openly talking about using drugs online, because if that candidate, becomes an employee and that employee meets a patient, right, and that patient decides to just Google the doctor that's working with them or the nurse that's working with them, that could be bad for our brand, for our patient, sort of community trust environment here. And the third piece is maintaining consistency. You hit on it, I think, at the top, but if you're having recruiters do this yourself, you have different people with different definitions of, let's just say, what intolerance or bigotry looks like, of what harassment looks like, maybe, even what something like illegal drugs might look like, right? You have different definitions of what each of those risky topics might be. So being able to sort of stay consistent, look at things holistically, put you in a position where you're giving folks the same check every single time. There's no disparate impact, nothing that, anyone is really looking at independently of another candidate. Doing it ethically, right? Like you mentioned politics. Sure, there is room and world for political screening. I think in some scenarios, if I was hiring someone to work on a political action committee or work for a political party, sure, I might want to know what their politics are, but generally, we advise our clients that you are looking for extremism. You are looking for people that are acting hateful, threatening, harassment around the topic that they're talking about, but certainly not by looking at things that are related to a protected class or, political behavior overall. And lastly, put yourself in a to make a data-driven decision. So this is, how we typically recommend folks roll out an online screening program, where again, I think it sort of takes what some folks thought this was, which is like, the government looking at everything that you're doing online and making a yes or a no decision. What this does is actually show you and tell you things. Hey, you wanted to know if someone tweeted something racist or recorded a TikTok video and talked about this certain thing? We can tell you about that, show you the content, let you bring that into your own hiring process and can use it in a hiring decision legally anywhere in the world.
Yeah, very, very interesting, man. I mean, like I say, I think Fama is pretty much, actually may not be a unique solution. I'm sure there's others out there. And actually, there's a question in the chat from Stephen who mentioned this. And yeah, it's a classic example. If you are recruiting for security people, police officers and stuff like this, it's pretty standard. You actually go through these checks, and we would expect this. It was like one of the arguments that actually emerged from some of the conversations that we've been having is those instances where checks have not been performed, whether it's through a lack of due diligence or because they had the position we shouldn't be checking. There have been some stories volunteered by the online commentators to say it actually went really badly, and that's actually sort of the history of Fama. I mean, I'm sure that's not a secret. This entire idea started, as I understand it, Ben, from our Founders Focus chat a long time ago, that you hired an individual that turned out to actually have really problematic behaviors, and that affected loads of people. And it was like, okay, we actually could have found that out by looking on some of the digital information.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I knew nothing about the world of HR tech or talent acquisition technology up until starting Fama in 2015. So, yeah, for those that haven't heard, I've had the unfortunate experience of missing something critical on a new hire that led to sexual harassment in the workplace, that led to a material amount of turnover, material financial impact. Not even talking and digging into the detail of what happened to this individual person, but yeah, I think the development back to the top of who we are in the workforce, right? And I think this is now reflected in the poll. Thanks for those of you that responded. But 2/3 of people say they're Googling people or looking on social media for risk. 2/3 of respondents, right, to our chat here. Very different than I think the numbers we saw in your initial poll there, Hung. Almost the other side, if you will, in terms of like how it's framed and how it's positioned. But really, I think we found ourselves in this moment where we're talking about a legacy problem solution statement, which is, how do I make sure I'm not going to hire someone who's going to do something terrible, who's going to act hateful towards people or alienate customers or alienate fellow coworkers? Now, because of the depth and scope and ever expanding nature of who we are in text, image, and video of our online identities, more employers are now turning to the online record, snapping back and saying, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that because I don't want to see all this stuff, but now coming back to the practice and program when, there are policies, companies like ours, and there are many vendors that are out there. Steve, we saw your question. We'll definitely follow up with you offline. But, I thought, I'll tell you, Hung, I thought when I started the company that, the problem that you alluded to, I thought was the only one we would ever solve. I thought that we would just be the company that would help you identify risk, be your seatbelt when you're hiring, if you will, be your insurance policy to help in many cases confirm everything you knew, everything you believed about the candidate that was coming in. But in rare cases, highlight the things, turn over the stones that you didn't know about, highlight the things that weren't immediately clear to you so that you can bring that into your hiring process. But what we've learned over really the past year or so is that there is so much more in this data itself. There is, I think, again, unlocked by, this text-based analysis, right, of being able to take the same technology that deconstructs and reconstructs text via GPT and other Gen AI tools to being able to actually get professional traits and competencies out of the language that somebody is creating online to get to the same point that if you were to take a self-assessment, it would tell you the same thing from what you wrote on LinkedIn, which is a concept I didn't believe at first, but with a few minutes left, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Probably a good moment to show your instant fit report. What do you think about that? You think the world is ready to see Hung Lee's traits and competencies?
I'm not sure whether the world's interested, but definitely happy to have a look at this. By the way, this is a revelation for me as well. I'm still sort of wrestling with grokking it because the checking is not just risk management. That's step number one, core basis.
Yeah.
And this works for compliance and all that type of stuff. But as you say, the volume of written communication that someone has sort of put out there, certainly someone like me, is so voluminous that it's much more than any CV or any application form or any even work exercise I might put in. And so basically, you're probably going to talk us through it, Ben, but basically I received this report really instantly. It was really quite fast. So it was a Gen AI style speed run. But I believe all that happened was my LinkedIn postings, historical LinkedIn postings, were piped in to this system. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of words that would be, and out come this report.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So look, I have a vested interest in advancing this product forward, but I didn't even believe in it at first, right? I remember when I mentioned this on LinkedIn when we posted about the webinar, but like when I talked about this for the first time, present in front of a large audience, people literally in unison were shouting, "No way!" Like they didn't believe it. They couldn't believe that it was possible. But to your point, the ability of technology today to be able to demystify and understand text, identify patterns, match that against a psychographic big five algorithm that can show us traits and competencies that have historically been shown, not in all cases, but in some cases, to predict performance through a range of validation studies. Extracting this insight is now possible from the reams and reams of online language that we have created. And believe it or not, Hung, this was 600 words minimum. That's all that we need to be able to run the check. And these are some of the traits and competencies. And think of this as kind of like a management report for recruiters, right? As a way to help advise a hiring manager on a short list of candidates who's going to be a fit, right, to help kind of move the needle again on making a hiring decision. But when you saw some of these, Hung, I'm sure you've taken plenty of assessments that are out there, and I know you mentioned you're embarking on a broader project to do that at an even greater scope. But what did you think when you saw this, right? I remember you mentioned this one stuck out to you. You said, "Dude, I'm not a conformer." Like you initially rejected this one, right, when you saw this.
Yeah, but my ego rejected it because it's one of these. Here's the thing with kind of reports of this type: we always want to put a big tick or a confirmation on things that are what we feel are complementary. And if it says something that makes us feel good, we're going to like about it. But here it comes up with a term I don't like about it. Conforming, it doesn't feel like that's who I am. So I immediately had a reaction against it. But then I kind of started thinking about it a little bit more, and my behavior on LinkedIn definitely is not about like impressing my point per se to an audience. It's trying to create a space where a useful conversation can happen, and allowing other people to come in and really share their opinions on this, and then it's through the collective sort of aggregation of those opinions that I think is where the value is. So yeah, I mean, I think made me understand sort of this trait coming out onto the report a bit more. But yeah, I think that absolutely. What I particularly like about this is it actually generates some potential interview questions. So it's a useful fact to use. Yeah, you can use it to if you want to do further investigation with the candidate, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we're coming up on time here, and I think we did see that you ranked highest on curiosity, which I think we would all agree for those that are lucky to know you, that you are a curious guy. You are always willing to go out there and ask the difficult questions, and for that we really appreciate it, man. And thank you so much for joining today's session, and anything you want to sort of leave for the audience before we say goodbye today.
Yeah, I just think that we need to be open-minded. No one needs to be convinced on any one particular paradigm or any one particular tool. But we are moving fast toward a world where we know that the legacy artifacts that we've relied on are no longer adequate. Like how can we trust the CV, for instance, a resume? We already know in the era of Gen AI that we cannot really trust that document. And our trust is going to erode even further as that technology improves. We used to scan sort of resumes based on how they fit to a job description. And candidates know already to pipe the job description in and say, look, reformat my resume so it best fits for this. This is basics for these technologies can now do. So we need to think about other ways to assess. I think the assessment as a category is going to expand because the job of the recruiter is shifting away from discovery to quality control. And quality control, as you say, is not about necessarily the qualified hire, it's the quality hire, and the quality hire is very context specific. There's a baseline. Obviously, person's got to be functionally competent at the job that you're looking for. But how do they actually work within that team or the culture that you've set up? That's not going to happen through looking at a resume. That needs to happen through a number of different assessment techniques, of which I think definitely seeing what this person's online life is about is not an irrelevant or trivial sort of component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just, once again, man, thank you so much for carving. I know you're in Berlin right now. It's probably getting late over there. So we appreciate you jumping on a call with us and doing today's webinar. And the last thing I would add is, like, while I 100% agree with the way that you framed it, I think the really important nuance here is that the generation of technology I think that we're going to see the most adoption around is that fuels the recruiter to get to that next step in their own thinking, right? I think recruiters have to remember that you have the expertise, you have the experience, you have that unique understanding of, in simple terms, what good looks like inside of your organization. It is the tools and technologies that can not make a decision for you, but collect information on your behalf, organize that information into insight, and advance your understanding so you can make a smarter decision to help move your organization and yourself forward. So that's what I leave everybody with, but we really appreciate you guys joining. Check us out at fama.io. You can find Hung anywhere on the internet. I think LinkedIn, Twitter, where else? TikTok, YouTube, wherever you are, we'll find you, Hung. So,
oh my God, there's another thing as well. Yeah, all my secret with the social channels, Ben. But no, it's actually really interesting too. I wonder whether people can try it. I mean, do you have a way in which the reports can be generated, or is it something you got to pay for, or what?
Yeah. Anybody who's attending this webinar can definitely come, reach out. Website, we have a page, get you a free instant fit report. We'd love for you to try it or look at any of other tools and technology that are out there.
Great.
Cool. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.